Heather is joining us today from Kansas, so Kansas City. So thank you very, very much. This is a very late night for you. I just found out it's 1 o'clock in the morning for Heather. So as this slide says, Heather is the group director of Discoverability, which she's going to tell you more about, but she's also a great international speaker, and that's how we came across her. We came across her through Women in Tech SEO, and she's going to tell you about building an integrated digital powerhouse. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you very, very much. All right, so I'm going to do the fancy share screen thing.
Give it a go.
Sure it works. We'll go with that. All right, how's it looking over there, my friends?
It looks perfect.
Okay, let me just move this little guy over here so I can actually see. Okay, so thank you guys so very much for having me today. It's very exciting. I stayed up late and everything. It's about 1 a.m. like he said. So if I yawn occasionally, it's not because I'm bored. It is because I'm a little sleepy. So thank you for your patience with that. So again, I'm Heather Fiziak, and I'm Group Director of Discoverability at VMLY&R. So this group includes the organic search, paid search, and performance content teams. And in the last several years, you may or may not have heard that VMLY&R has gone through a few mergers, effectively doubling our agency's global footprint overnight. In fact, we literally just announced about 10 days ago yet another merger with one of our network mates, Geometry. They're a big global e-commerce agency. Pretty cool. I, for one, am stoked because with mergers comes a ton of different complementary skill sets and a lot of new or shared clients that we can do great work for. And I'll actually talk a little bit about that today. So today we're going to talk about how we brought these 3 teams I just listed under one discoverability umbrella and some of the learnings and the hard knocks that we got along the way. So you will learn about the concept of interdisciplinarity, the benefits and the challenges that come with cross-functional integration, and I'll give you some actionable tips on how you can improve collaboration in your own company across your own digital practices. So I won't spend too much time on my brag slide since I've already been introduced, but the main thing you need to know is that I head up the North American Discoverability Group, which is about 35-ish experts in 3 disciplines across 6 offices in North America. My background is journalism. I teach in the master's program at the University of Kansas in my spare time, and I like dogs. And Poppy is asleep behind me. It's way past her bedtime. And these are just a few of the awesome clients that we've got the very good fortune of working with. So as an industry, we talk a pretty good game on collaboration, but the truth is that it does not really happen the way that we say it happens. So digital marketers go waltzing into these new business pitches and we make grand claims about how integrated we are or how we sit right next to the people that we work with on other teams, at least when we were all in offices in the US. So we preach that our digital marketing recommendations are better than the average bear because we have this more holistic offering. Kumbaya, cue this dorky stock photo, like nobody really does this. And the moment we leave the room, we get sucked back into our silos, right? We get buried by the day-to-day task lists of our jobs, and we're focusing on our own areas of expertise again. We go back to writing SEO scopes and PPC scopes separately without accounting for things like the content resources that we need to make those channels successful. Or we bring recommendations to our bosses and our clients that don't have the buy-in from our peers in other digital marketing disciplines. We go back to not bringing each other in and yet complaining about not being brought in. So when we went through these mergers, we saw an opportunity. We saw the opportunity to solve these chronic content production problems that clients have, that we need for search, by the way, through bringing in this performance content team. And we saw the opportunity to improve collaboration across paid search and organic search to get better outcomes. So in this moment, we raised our hands to merge into one group. So now our group looks like this. We've got the discoverability name and those 3 teams ladder up, right? So now we've got this completely different model than we did before, but I want to be clear, this looks different in every organization. There's no one silver bullet ideal team structure. There are pros and cons to every team arrangement. You may not even be on the same team or even in the same company, but these principles and these learnings that I'm going to share with you apply no matter who you're trying to integrate with search or any other digital marketing discipline. So now we have these 3 teams under one umbrella. And before this, all of them were perfectly smart and successful independently. So why should we bother moving away from these 3 separate swim lanes to this one cohesive unified group? And equally important, how? So I want to introduce to you the concept of interdisciplinarity. This is an academic term for when 2 or more schools of thought combine and cross traditional boundaries to solve shared challenges. And by doing this, they get the benefits of integrating and updating their individual approaches into this new holistic approach. And that can help solve for the harmful effects of siloing and excessive specialization. And in this rapidly evolving an increasingly commoditized field of search and digital marketing, we have to be thinking about this. So you find interdisciplinarity in a lot of well-known technical and scientific fields. You'll see it in neuroscience, biochemistry, cybernetics. And I'm not saying that discoverability is like life-saving rocket surgery or whatever, but there is new ground to be forged in the field of search and digital marketing. And there's a stark difference between complementarity and interdisciplinarity. The fact is that anybody can go online and learn SEO. Truly anyone can learn PPC. Many digital marketing teams or agencies can offer complementary strategy where they're at least not contradicting each other's efforts, but few do what I would truly call interdisciplinary work, where they're offering new and evolved capabilities in search. Now, true interdisciplinarity is when the sum of the whole is greater than its parts. And this is situational, right? It doesn't look the same in any given situation. In any interdisciplinary offering, you bring the people with the relevant expertise and specialties to the table, and they bring their unique knowledge and experiences for a more cohesive end-to-end digital marketing offering that's completely custom for the need. But it's also repeatable and it's refinable as more similar problems come along in the future. And this concept of interdisciplinarity has been a driving force that's guided our group's way. Everything we do since joining forces is focused on leveling up our offering as a result of joining forces. So we have all new offerings, not just in how we implement organic search, paid search, right performance content. Now we are also helping our clients that are in complex organizations figure out how to do interdisciplinary work too. So we get to help them evolve how they think about and do search through this interdisciplinary model. So let's dig a little deeper. Let's talk about some of the obstacles that you are likely to face as you're trying to integrate different capabilities, the wins that you stand to gain, and then true hardcore actionable tips on how you can actually implement this in your own digital teams. So you know what they say, no pain, no gain. And trust me, there will be some growing pains along the way. So the first major obstacle you are likely to encounter is simply moving from saying that paid and organic search collaborate to actually doing it. Digital marketers have said that we collaborate well for so long that it's easy to become complacent and sort of fail to see how things could be any better than they already are. It is a huge, massive cultural shift to move from these individual digital marketing athletes on 3 different teams to this single all-star world champion marketing team. And it doesn't happen overnight. So the next major risk is the risk of becoming less agile. So counterintuitively, the larger your team, the harder it is to collaborate. And that's especially true when all the people on the team do completely different things. So you have to be mindful that you don't become a behemoth so big that you lose your ability to move quickly. So true story, when I brought our performance content team under organic search originally, I kind of tried to force them to adapt to all of our ways of doing things, but it didn't quite fit and it became hard to move the whole group forward. So we had to step back, take a moment of humility, and we decided as a group to change our umbrella name to Discoverability. But we encouraged those individual teams underneath to maintain their identity and their autonomy. We wanted to empower them to make decisions that were right for their teams and right for their clients, but at least didn't run counter to the spirit of what the group is trying to accomplish. So the lesson here for me was don't force it. Group identity is important, but it doesn't negate the need for team autonomy. Excuse me. So interdisciplinary teams fail when they don't have enough autonomy. At first, I tried to force everyone to collaborate on everything all the time. And that design by committee approach led to frustrated people and diluted solutions. It's very dry in Kansas City right now, so please forgive me. So it felt important to keep that connective tissue that bonds us as a group, but allow smaller teams to spin up as needed to solve different digital marketing problems. This approach helps to combat that problem of becoming too big to stay nimble. So next is negotiating roles and defending turf. So while my teams were never us versus them, when we were coming together, some conflicts are inevitable as you're figuring out ways of working together. And often you'll see that take the form of perceived competition for diminishing budgets, vying for the final say on a course of action. Wow, struggling, guys, hang in there with me. Vying for the final say on a course of action, but there's bound to be some negotiating of roles or maybe even some kind of turf defending. But the thing is, when you're merging capabilities or groups like this, we're all sharing the same turf. It is an exercise in humility to give everyone's expertise equal weight, and it takes extra effort to give your digital teammates the benefit of the doubt. You have to relearn as a marketer how to actively seek perspective of others in different disciplines instead of an accidental afterthought. And then we have to learn to choose our battles. We have to know when to fight for our recommendations versus taking a back seat. We have to create a culture where all of us wins when one of us wins. Next is merging processes. So when each team had its own perfectly good way of doing things, they can often become slow or resistant to change. So it's important to understand each team's processes and ways of working before you go in and start ripping them apart. You need to understand why things are the way they are, why they're done the way they are, before trying to overhaul it all. And trying to overhaul everything at once was kind of like boiling the ocean. We learned that we had to start making 1% changes one at a time. Change fatigue is the last big obstacle you're likely to encounter. By the last merger, I literally had someone on my team saying, I cannot change my email address one more time. Totally fried. So when you are making constant major change, it can lead to burnout, or it feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But we learned that if you build sort of a culture across your disciplines of ongoing testing and learning and optimization, that sets the expectation that change is necessary for growth. So we learned to make change iteratively and at these natural points of friction at first, so it actually feels like a bit of relief when you're making change. So one example, if anybody on the call is an SEO background, is when keyword research for SEO is a complete afterthought for creating content. This is a very common point of friction for SEOs, but one simple change, like adding keywords and questions to some kind of content brief prior to creating content, can make a huge, huge difference. And having those briefs made both our writers and our SEOs jobs easier. And small wins like that, that solve problems that were kind of nagging at people, helps to build momentum and endurance on your team for more change. So if it's so hard, why bother doing it? Well, for us anyway, we learned that cross-selling and upselling was huge. We learned that most of our growth doesn't actually come from big fancy new business pitches, but rather expanding our existing client relationships. And knowing this fact has helped us to intersect our offerings more than we ever had before. So now, instead of having 4 people advocating for one team, 12 advocating for another team, and so on, I now have 35 people advocating for a whole unified practice and the individual specialties underneath. And we're constantly brainstorming triggers for SEO to bring performance content in, or how paid search makes sense to loop in organic search. So if you had talked to me a couple of years ago, I would have said that about a quarter of our clients are working with more than one of our teams. But through this process of cross-selling and upselling across our digital services, now more than 85% of our clients are using at least 2 teams, if not all 3. So we are frequently cross-selling, for example, when clients get stuck on content resources. So again, if any of you have worked in search or any digital field that requires content production, you know that this can be a problem. But this cross-selling model allows us to lift and shift budget seamlessly between one digital offering and another, often from SEO to our performance content team, so we can create that content ourselves. So we've done things like offering performance content pilots to our clients so we can have the opportunity to show our writing chops and prove the critical search outcomes you get when you have great content. Another opportunity for cross-selling and upselling, our organic search and our paid search teams are constantly talking about how to dominate search engine results pages together. In the past, this looked like PPC figuring out how to own paid, SEO figuring out how to own organic, and they were entirely separate conversations. But now we have those experts sitting side by side in a room with our clients, digitally now, but physically before. And we're talking about how to dominate whole SERPs. We're talking about how those channels play off of each other to seize every space possible at the best price possible. And this more integrated search offering reduces this common problem of like one service getting line itemized out of a scope, if that makes sense. So the next big benefit is that speed and scale are going to reach new levels on your digital team. This integrated collaborative model allows you to better distribute labor across the group. So a few examples of where we've done that tactically. First, we often have our performance content writers writing SEO title tags and meta descriptions or PPC ad copy, whereas before the search experts were doing that. And writing isn't always a search expert's background, but also when we have a huge volume increase of SEO title tags and meta descriptions we need to do, we need to be able to distribute that labor. The second example is when we have our paid and organic search experts doing joint competitive analysis and keyword research together, which has gone a long way to reduce duplication of efforts and makes our findings a lot more cohesive and actionable in an intelligent way across those channels. And my third example is dividing and conquering stuff like our strategic search playbooks that we do. That's often the first major project we do for a client where we assess their landscape and create a roadmap for their digital marketing. But when we divide and conquer these across different disciplines and different members of the team, we are able to cover more research ground more quickly. We can share learnings with one another and peer review the work from different perspectives. It speeds up the delivery of our strategies by full weeks, and it simply delivers a stronger product. Next is knowledge sharing. This is humongous as a benefit. This data sharing mentality becomes second nature for your marketers. So you're finding opportunities in the data that you maybe would not have seen before, because a deeper and wider pool of knowledge builds a deeper and smarter bench of talent. So one example, we have done e-commerce on a major consumer sweets brand for a long, long time. And a big part of our responsibility is optimizing their content across retailers like Amazon or Walmart.com, things like that, and their owned .com websites, right? And so we have to collaborate across this group to coordinate our e-commerce and our non-e-commerce keyword research so we can achieve maximum visibility across both engines and retailers without the huge cannibalization problem. It helps us to use search data and questions to overcome shopper objections when we're writing product detail pages from the performance content team. It's less work, less cannibalization, and that kind of work that we're doing is winning awards. So to boil some of that down, we had to create a vulnerable and sharing-oriented culture where no one feels the pressure to know everything, and my team is unafraid to ask for help. We needed to create a crowdsourced culture where we pool our knowledge and find efficiencies and solve problems faster rather than fighting battles alone and with only one point of view. And we had to create an innovation culture where we constantly find points of friction and frustration, and we develop new ways of working to streamline and pick up speed. And then a holistic approach starts to emerge. We're more integrated, we're more collaborative, so we're minimizing cannibalism, we're minimizing competition because we've stopped worrying about whose budget and whose targets, and we've started thinking about what's best for the brand. This model allows us to steer resources to whichever area of digital marketing is the greatest opportunity or where the greatest impact will be felt in a much more seamless way. So a great example here, we have a big B2B client that is nationwide plus a few international markets. And originally when they hired us, they gave us individual objectives by team. So the email marketing team had one objective and the organic search team had another objective. So naturally, this creates the risk that it's every team for themselves. But at the end of the day, the entire agency was held to a huge double-digit millions of dollars growth number year over year. And ultimately, it doesn't matter which channel or channels deliver as long as we deliver for the client. So great example of how that's come to life in a real way. But let's talk about one specific example on that same client. We actually had an interesting finding in the data recently, thanks to this holistic approach on the B2B client. So our SEO and our PPC experts realized in the data that when paid search spend was paused temporarily, SEO traffic spiked for that same set of high search volume terms. And so when they spotted that, they were able to collaborate to develop a plan of action to test this observation or this theory and see if there's something to it. So they came up with a plan that included a few key action items. One, shifting PPC budget from keywords ranking on page 1 to keywords ranking on page 2. Test number 2, we want to downbid on non-branded keywords that saw the biggest increase when paid search was turned off. Or test 3, we wanted to test shifting budget for non-branded keywords ranking in positions 1 through 3 to emphasizing ones where we ranked 4 through 10 organically. So we are running those tests as we speak, and the client kindly thanked us for our holistic recommendation. She specifically called it out. And I think the reason is because when you have a more integrated digital approach, trust and visibility in your recommendations increases. They have more weight, they have more credibility when they are vetted from multiple digital experts in different perspectives. So we as digital marketers across disciplines need to be talking about joint opportunities. We need to talk about how channels perform together and separately. We need to balance our decision-making around paid and organic channels. This more thoughtful approach is more easily defensible to your boss or your client. It demonstrates more bang for their buck because the recommendation is good for multiple channels. It makes it easier for them to say yes and invest. And you'll find that new capabilities begin to emerge at these intersections between your digital practices, whether it's 2 or 3 or more. And so when you're operating in this interdisciplinary way, you're able to see opportunities that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And it allows you to build and launch unified services. For us, that was digital shelf optimization on e-commerce websites, or enhanced landing page development that takes into account considerations from all three of those channels. By identifying and defining these deliverables, it's helped our colleagues to sell and scope these new kinds of work. And it also starts to make our offerings repeatable, and we continue to refine them together. And this unified approach has led to competitive advantage. I always say that competitive advantage is when you are willing to put in the legwork that your competitors can't, won't, or don't. And these unique points of distinction and capabilities are ones that others simply do not have. And it's made us increasingly indispensable to our clients. They cannot imagine going back to this world of marketing silos from before. True interdisciplinarity is very hard to accomplish, so it's hard for competitors to replicate. So we looked at industries far beyond search and digital marketing even for inspiration so we could get this right. We looked at academia, the sciences, social work. And remember, these tips apply no matter whether you're agency or in-house, if you do search or something else entirely in digital marketing. All of these are actionable. Building the world's most connected brands starts with connected teams. So this has become my team's mantra since we integrated our group. Building connected brands is sort of the ladder view for VMLY&R, but this is my group's mantra and how we ladder up to the bigger picture vision. Everything we do is focused entirely on creating more value for our brands. So what is your mantra? What is your team's mantra or your new capabilities mantra? You need to give those marketers a guiding light that's going to define every move you make as you integrate. So my first tip is to simply announce the change quickly. If you're a leader, rip the Band-Aid off and do it fast. Make it clear what you're doing and why, make the case for the benefits, and be honest about the challenges to get their buy-in. Be sure to get people involved in the mission as soon as humanly possible, and set the expectation that we sink or we swim together. I know that the most successful people in the face of change are not the ones who waste time obstructing the inevitable, but rather those who roll up their sleeves and look for ways to help. After you've done the announcing, you should immediately take action to bring the teams or capabilities together and start to activate on that change. Get the experts in the room face to face as early and often as possible. You need to start a dialogue around a common mission and vision, and you should be brainstorming ideas together on how to move forward together. And once established, your new team or your new capability or your new offering, whatever it may be, reintroduce that team or that offering to your organization. Put faces with names. Tell people what this new capability or team is and what they're responsible for. When we went through our first major merger with Rockfish, we held something called the Rockfish Sessions. So I brought all of our new teammates out from all three teams to get us in the room together for a couple days for a big knowledge share, really. You can do this digitally in the post-COVID world as well. But these sessions had introductions, icebreakers, get to know yous, because we had a lot of relationships to build. But we also had overarching sessions about the department that folks were joining and the different teams that were coming together. We shared about our capabilities. We shared our strongest case studies and processes from each of the teams. We got to know each other beyond the work too. There were plenty of team building exercises, going out for dinner and drinks. And I can actually provide a sample agenda for an immersion session like this. I'll make sure to get that to the organizers. So we've announced and immersed quickly, but now it's time to slow down, to speed up when you're implementing the actual change. Remember, we're not trying to boil the ocean. We want to focus on 1% changes one at a time at these natural points of intersection or moments of friction, right? So give ownership of different change initiatives to people, little pods or teams of people from each side or each capability. So you can make sure you're considering all the angles, which helps with buy-in across the group. Next is remember that no process is precious. You as a newly integrated group or capability have to commit to establishing clear processes that incorporate those key stakeholders, those different digital marketing disciplines. You have to bring those voices to the table to collaborate in creating and refining these workflows that they will be responsible for executing on. So for my group, we actually created a living wiki, which sort of reinforces the message of steady evolution. So our team uses Confluence, where we document workflows and our service offerings or logins and passwords, all sorts of different capabilities that we've developed over the years, and we reference it constantly. That is our central source of truth. We are updating it and reorganizing it regularly. Everyone on the team, all 30 something of us, have full access and trust to continue to refine that information whenever we see a need. And as a group, we check in on what isn't working periodically and simply ditch what doesn't serve us. If something like that speaks to you, look up my name plus Atlassian, the company that owns Trello. And I actually did a whole interview with them about our ways of working on that with a little more detail. Next is a cross-train to build advocacy. So we conduct pretty continuous cross-training in each other's skills. Learning and growth is a very important core value of our group. But the point is not to be able to do each other's jobs. It's more to be able to speak about them, to advocate for them, and cross-sell each other. And we've done a number of workshops and hands-on trainings, but one of my favorite things that we did, strong recommend, is we actually tried our hands at swapping tasks. So for example, several of our SEOs, myself included, actually learned to write e-commerce product detail pages for Amazon in the optimal way. And maybe our performance content writers learned to write SEO tags and PPC ad copy. But this exercise creates empathy and builds trust on your cross-functional digital team to the point where we can kind of fill in for each other and advocate for each other when we're not in the room. So it also creates mental checks to ask things like, am I including the right people? Or could my work affect someone else? And that moment of empathy goes a long way to building trust across a cross-disciplinary team. And if you are a leader, or even if you're not a manager, everybody is a leader, make that a habit in your group or in your capability by course correcting people kindly when they forget, but also validating and rewarding when people adopt this new way and get it right. Next is to productize service offerings. I'll try to explain this concept here. So in our first year as a unified group, we set a team goal of productizing 10 of our joint offerings to make it easier to scope and sell. So we looked at all of our recurring SEO and performance content services and looked for ways that we could enhance them or make them stronger by adding in the new capabilities. But we also developed all new joint offerings that simply did not exist before. And like I said before, we appoint small cross-team committees to define the value of that offering, the inputs, outputs, cost, timing, process for each of them. So for us, this looked like search-driven content insights to support big burst creative campaigns with supplemental content. And it looked like this comprehensive digital shelf optimization service that crosses all three of our teams. So here's the thing, when clients ask us for e-commerce, they don't expect one small part of a solution or 1/3 of a solution. So this joint process identifies a whole approach for e-commerce clients from end to end, including all touch points across these three channels in order to be their most effective. And we're not selling individual pieces or 3 things a la carte anymore. We are selling one. We are solving one big problem for a client. Now, this is sort of a no-duh to recommend and report together if you want a collaborative, integrated team. But for whatever reason, this is a major struggle to this day in the digital marketing industry. I mean, constantly, digital marketers are doing these disjointed pardon my French, half-assed like reporting slides. You smash them together, but we're not actually compiling and discussing the data together. We're not talking about what is this larger story that the data is telling us that the client should care about. So that mentality has to change, because it's our job as a cross-functional digital marketing team to help our clients or our bosses prioritize where to focus. And how can you possibly do that if you haven't considered all the channels that they could be focusing on? So as digital marketers, we need to be evaluating these opportunities together. It's simple, but it is rarely done. So we could be collecting insights from all the sources and presenting findings to one another. We should be working together to decide the biggest opportunity together. We should be working together to put together a joint roadmap for digital marketing success, not an SEO plan and an email plan and a social plan. So with that big B2B client I mentioned earlier, we also had a major local search data opportunity. So while they are a big national brand, they're actually competing on a hyper local front. We call it death by 1,000 paper cuts. So we're actually, with this big national brand, we're going up against small mom and pops in every single individual local market that they're in. So in order to be successful, the client said she needed hyperlocal data to make good local marketing decisions on the fly. Now note that she did not ask us for local SEO or local PPC. She asked for a local strategy. She asked for local data. And admittedly, initially, when she was kind of going one team at a time, teams were scratching their heads and kind of skeptical we could deliver on the ask. But that only held until we were actually all in a room together in Chicago, where it felt like the conversation just cracked wide open. We had experts from paid search, paid media, social media, analytics, organic search, performance content, and probably more, and the client as well in the room. And as we're talking about it, we realized that we could be bringing data in from all of these different sources into one place to make these decisions. We had demographic and psychographic data from our media team. We had click data from the paid search team, local search keyword volume for organic search. We had inventory, sales, and location data from the client. So we collected all of these data sources and APIs and worked with our data scientists to plug it into this just insane Tableau dashboard, where we can now slice and dice these things on the fly on all these different quadrants and make local marketing decisions on the fly. It's exactly what she asked for and more. And it has enormous implications for every channel we're running for the brand. If we had not had this conversation across disciplines, this never would have happened. Monthly account strategy sessions. Okay, next one. So before you roll your eyes and go, cool, another meeting, thanks, Heather, stick with me. So it's super, super easy to get stuck in the status quo and retire to our own individual corners, our own individual disciplines. So at a minimum, this monthly account strategy session is a time to share what's happening, right? But this session is bigger than a to-do list or a status update. You should be discussing and strategizing across digital disciplines how the brand is performing, problems we're solving, opportunities we're seeing, big risks or threats, joint efforts and tests that we could be running. This simple meetup can benefit any group that you're trying to collaborate with. So establish those recurring roundtables with other departments or global regions, brainstorm and deep dive these digital marketing opportunities together. After a few months of these, it becomes much more than a meeting, but rather like a way of life, a way of thinking, a way of working. I will also send a handy discussion guide that we use to get the most out of these sessions and avoid them becoming another check the boxes status update meeting. Next is to build a networked team. A networked team is one that has central sources of truth, like the Confluence Wiki I mentioned earlier, but the operations and the execution of the work is more decentralized. So the ideal networked team, according to Forrester, is one that can spin up small task forces for specific objectives, one that is low hierarchy, transparent, and open. They calibrate and adjust to one another quite quickly, and they have trust in one another because not everyone is needed in the room for every single decision because they are operating on the same wavelength. So while they have common standards and best practices, the networked team takes those standards and best practices and modifies and adapts them to deliver on the problem however they need to. Hopefully that makes sense so far. So it's kind of a balance between individual local team empowerment and like a centralized command and control model. So this same process or same tool, same workflow could come to life in dozens of different ways by brand or category, objective, whatever. So an example here, e-commerce optimization again. So I showed you that really solid, repeatable joint workflow a little bit ago, but it comes to life in different ways for different clients. So for example, the way that we sell consumer packaged goods on a third-party retailer like Amazon is very different from how we sell high-end fashion via a direct-to-consumer e-commerce retailer website. So we may have a different team makeup, we may tweak the approach however we need to, but we have all those resources thanks to being a networked team to sort of shorten the runway to be able to deliver the best solution. Next is creating a culture of feedback. Coaching and direct immediate feedback to peers and bosses and everyone involved in the operation can greatly speed and enhance integration. When I first did this talk, I almost said empower people to give feedback, but it's too wimpy. It's not enough. You have to expect people to speak up and contribute ideas. You need to make transparency and accountability part of your culture. And that means feedback to each other. That means feedback to you. It means peer reviewing each other's work and recommendations. It means scrutinizing our processes and ways of doing things. All of these various forms that feedback can take make the work stronger. They decrease the margin for error. They make your people stronger, and they make that culture of feedback less personal and more about the quality of the work. Don't just tell the people that you're collaborating with to do it. You have to model it. Teach them how to do it constructively and kindly and empathetically, and hold them to account when they're not living it. Next is marketing collaborative successes. So marketing success can be a huge driver of integration as well because it's getting buy-in from the outside. So you need to always be spotting wins or warnings so you can create case studies for internal or external use. You need to find those meaningful wins that cross the different teams or functions. Make sure that your teams and your clients and bosses and colleagues are hearing those stories. It increases buy-in and understanding and engagement with that service or group. So one way that we do it, we have our quarterly all discoverability group meetings. I always like to highlight at least one great story or case study that has crossed multiple functions on the team. Great way to get the gears turning and ideas coming. Anyway. Details. So last is sit together whenever possible, but I say this very loosely in this post-COVID world, but who you sit with, who you work with, who you collaborate with matters. The ability to strike up a conversation about something you're working on and just talk shop is amazingly powerful. Now, when we were physically in the office, you could just turn your chair around and ask questions, but we're a global office. Not everybody can just do that. So you have to be able to do that digitally too. Rearranging the floor plan is not in the cards for everyone. So if it doesn't make sense because you're at different companies in different cities or all working from home around the globe, still look for every opportunity for human contact, whether it's video chat or traveling for in-person meetings, desk bombs or drive-bys. Spend part of your day parked with your colleagues in their part of the office, or use real-time chat like a Microsoft Teams or Slack, or phone calls, whatever it takes to be present and anything but another bloody email. All right, so what have we learned? Let's bring it home. First, as individual teams, we are experts, but as integrated digital practices, we're powerhouses. Selling these whole end-to-end services that have greater impact together than separately makes us more indispensable to clients or bosses who cannot imagine going back to the disjointed world of before. Now, doing our individual jobs is relatively easy, but doing them together in all new ways and doing it well is hard. And getting that right helps us stand out from the competition. It's a major cultural shift. It is an iterative process with lots of growing pains along the way, but I confidently believe and have seen with my own eyes that it is worth it. And this does not have to mean merging teams like I did. This could be creating a competency around a certain type of work or a certain type of client that transcends the org chart. As time goes on, new things are created, the team matures, the lines between them start to blur. And when that new culture or service is established, make sure you are hiring and promoting for the traits that sustain it. You need communication and team players, collaboration, accountability, transparency, empathy. That is how you make interdisciplinarity happen. And finally, there will be bumps along the way. It can be frustrating and time consuming, and it's really hard work to create a culture of openness and vulnerability and feedback. But when you create that expectation of iteration and evolution and change, collaboration and interdisciplinarity, I think you'll find that you have the fortitude to get through those obstacles and forge something entirely new. Now remember, competitive advantage is doing the work that your competitors can't, won't, or don't. Because if it were easy, everyone would do it. All right, so that is the end. I would love to take questions from the gang.
Well, first of all, Heather, thank you so much for that. I think I know for me and Freddie, there was a huge amount in there that you were talking about that really resonates with us and our stage of business and trying to become more joined up in the way we operate as a team. So we know firsthand that as you grow as a business, because we're still a very small business in comparison to you guys, doing things well together is very, very challenging. So yeah, I think thank you so much for sharing all of those. A few things I loved from that was the connected teams mantra. That's a great mantra to have. I don't think we have anything that succinct as a team yet, but we'll certainly be searching for it after this. And also the rigor around feedback. That's something that we really believe in as a team. And my colleague Cecilia joined us part of the way through that, and she always says feedback is a gift. Yes. Which it is. It can be hard to hear sometimes, but it's certainly something we do. And just the approach you guys have taken is, I think you've just summarized it and made it seem a hell of a lot easier than I can imagine it actually would have been to go from A to Z.
I make it sound easy, but the reality is we are working at it every single day. I mean, we've been a merged team for, this is the end of our third year, I think, second year. It's hard every day, but it gets better every day. It's worth it.
It's great to hear this from such a big agency, actually, because I think my view on bigger agencies has previously been when I've worked with particularly big global agencies, as they grow, they become disjointed.
Yep.
So it's really, really good to hear this approach you've got and how it's working for you.
I mean, we're working hard to reverse that trend. I completely agree. Every major agency I've ever worked at, it's like the bigger you get, the more fragmented it gets. Nobody knows who anybody is. Nobody's working together. But it has only improved through this model over the last several years. It's been great.
Awesome. So we're going to get on to other people's questions now. But again, just want to thank you for that before we move on to other questions. Your communication style at 1 o'clock in the morning is very, very impressive. Okay, so
coughing in the dry winter air. What's the weather like where you are?
it's hot. So first of all, Nishanth has asked, how can in-house SEO teams make a case with the management for integrated content stroke PPC teams when we don't have any wins or numbers to share with them?
In there. Yeah, no, I totally get it. Honestly, there's two things I would recommend. One is look at the other case studies that are out there. I promise you there are a number of case studies that people put openly on the web. Like look at a SEER Interactive or a Moz, for example. They're gonna have content and case studies about joint offerings. So use somebody else's work and somebody else's testing and dollars to prove the concept to get that buy-in. Part two, forgiveness, not permission. Is that an okay answer? Basically, just do the thing because you know it's the right thing to do, even if it requires a little bit of an investment or a little bit of risk, or just going above and beyond to deliver better, smarter recommendations and show them that this is a better way. Maybe, yeah, don't wait for permission to do what you know is the right thing to do, I guess. And maybe that's sort of culturally a VMLY&R thing where we're like, if you know what the right thing to do is, go do it. But truly that's been, I mean, when I first started at VML 6-7 years ago, truly I was the one SEO person there and there was one PPC person there and we absolutely were not talking. We kind of completely reinvented the way we do things, but it started by just doing them and showing people once we did. I hope that's not too oversimplified. I know life is more complicated than that.
That's a really good answer. So next we have 3 questions from Miroslav, but I'll start with first. What tools do you use to communicate among teams, team members, and do you prefer push for any particular, do you prefer or push for any particular tools as opposed to anything that works?
Gosh, okay, so that is a problem that I feel like has not gotten better in the agency world. Is there's just 1,000,001 tools in the tool stack and everybody's using something different. I'm actually really glad you asked this question because it is a real thing. So the first thing I did in my group was eliminated all of the extra things. Like we just had to evaluate our options and pick our tool stack. So our tool stack is now really 4 things. We have Trello for project management, Confluence, which is also in the Atlassian family for our like central source of truth. And then 2 other things that are, Microsoft Teams is our chat platform, which is now across the whole agency globally. Thank God. Oh my God, we're all talking to each other so much. It's great. And then just like our file server, which was SharePoint or OneDrive or something like that. So really it's less about which tools you pick and much more about picking them and sort of exerting some bossness so people know what we're all using. I think that's just the missing piece at most companies is saying, look guys, this is what we use, get rid of everything else. But it was like bringing files in from Google Drive onto our server and communicating that this is our central source of truth and we don't put things in other places. It's kind of that simple and that complicated, but eventually people build the habit and sort of fall in line with the ways of working.
Are you using a project management system?
For my group, it's just Trello, and it's very independent, self-managed. We all add our own projects in, but that's because search and content are very flexible. But we also see a lot of Workfront on the client side or Jira for like more technical development type groups.
Okay. Awesome.
And we found connectors. So on that big B2B client I was mentioning, so we use Trello, our developers use Jira, they're both Atlassian products. There are tools that will link the 2 so we don't have to duplicate efforts to have visibility into projects on both sides. It'll just port them over to both.
Makes life a lot easier.
Did that get weird and nerdy?
No, I think you're talking our language here. I mean, we again, I'm sure everyone on this call uses different project management systems, and getting things to talk to each other can be a real problem. I was on a project last week where there was Trello, Basecamp, and one other. Different partners using different things, and it's a nightmare. So yes, when they integrate, that makes life a bit more pleasurable for everyone, I think.
The struggle is real.
It is. So another one from Miro is, do you find that the total team hours and workload delivery time increases or decreases with the interdisciplinary approach that you've described?
Okay, I love this question too. Okay, whoever this is asking a really good question, so high five. So how do I break this down? It's sort of an anomaly. So on the one hand, things are getting faster because we have more people to be able to take on work, fit it in around the gaps. We're able to, we have more resources who are capable of doing more things now because we do the cross training. So in that way, it's a huge time saver. But on the other hand, for a lot of our new joint offerings, it is probably more hours, more cost to the client, right? But it's a better product, it's a better outcome. It is very worthwhile that they're spending more money. So we were able to grow our revenue and grow our incoming projects and clients by adding all these offerings while also making it faster and smoother and more seamless. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think
it's
it
a little
does.
tricky to explain. How do you do things faster and yet still take longer and make more money?
Thank you for that. So I'm going to go to Nishant and then I'll come back to Miro's final question. So Nishant has asked, can you share or recommend any tools that you've used for SEO or PPC or for optimization?
I'm interpreting that question as like tools that we would use across both practices.
Yes, that's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, we all have access to the full tool stack now, which is also a benefit of that interdisciplinary team model. Before, you know, the paid search team had Kantar and SpyFu, and we didn't really have access. And then we had SEMrush and Moz, and they didn't really have access. So now we all have access to the tools, so we can all kind of go wherever we want. As far as joint optimization, a handful of the tools in our tool stack have paid and organic search information separately or together. It really varies heavily. I think a lot of that cross-functional work actually happens after the data has been retrieved from those various tools and we start compiling it and analyzing it and discussing it together. I mean, because we are knowledge workers. The tools that we use in our stack and the tools that our clients invest in are only as good as the people who can interpret and analyze and apply that. So SEMrush and Kantar and all of these different Google Keyword Planner, they're all powerful for all three of my teams, but the magic happens offline.
Excellent, thank you. I want to pick up on one point you mentioned there, actually, because I think for many of us who have worked on processes in this area previously, you mentioned that we're knowledge workers and people have capability, they have expertise. And one of the things that we've found as a business, and this is something that I found over many different roles in agencies, is that defining processes too tightly, you can often impact the quality of work that's delivered by very capable experts. So have you come up against that as a problem, and how have you dealt with that?
Gosh, that's such a good one. And that's like the elevated level problem too. I am a historically rigid and process-driven person. Confession time, right? This is something I have embraced and struggled with my whole life, that I just have a great way of doing things and I like to be optimal and fast and whatever. It doesn't work in the networked team model. So I've had a few years of humility and learning along the way, but the intent of things like defining these processes and deliverables and workflows is not to have this super rigid, inflexible checklist approach to work. And I think if I had continued down the path of that super rigid thing, I would be doing exactly what you just said, which is sort of hamstringing my great talent that when left to their own devices and just given tools, they will create amazing things. But when you put them in a box, they're going to create things within the confines of that box. So the networked team model puts all of those tools, all of those resources, access to recommended workflows in a central place where everyone knows to find it, but we take out that element of rigidity and force. The truth is, no one ask that we get from any given client is exactly identical. So we have to be flexible and adaptable to whatever issue arises or whatever challenge that a client brings us. Yeah. So that's it. It's like basically put the things out there, instruct your team that this is what we all agreed on as the resources, tools, and ways of working, but you go bring it to life how it needs to come to life for that challenge or in your way or from your perspective. You have to just create room for that creativity.
Great insight. Thank you for sharing that.
Sounds like we've shared a lot of the same challenge.
Yeah, we have. I think so much of your presentation resonated with us. I think anyone who's running running a team with across disciplines will understand where you're coming from.
And I do want to build on that for a second, because I did talk a lot about teams, integrating teams, but I want to clarify the point that oftentimes it has nothing to do with what team you're on. It's like a specific service you guys are offering or a specific task or a specific type of client. So these tips still apply.
Absolutely. So one last question from Mira, which is, how do you handle, another good question, thanks Mira for this, how do you prevent team members from getting overwhelmed by new information or requests?
Yeah. Here's the thing. So as far as like incoming work requests from other teams or clients, that we've streamlined really well by creating just a project request form. Even if we're talking to them on the phone, we can fill out the form ourselves because it reminds us to capture critical information. And that makes it so all project requests come in through one point instead of everybody going to the SEO that they know and just piling work on them. So that's one interpretation of the question. The other interpretation of the question is, you have all these processes and tools and ways of working and systems, and you're just bombarding people with this stuff. And that is actually a problem I'm dealing with right now. We're trying to figure out, like, now that we've built all this structure and all this process, how do we avoid this becoming very cumbersome and unpleasant to do, because you're just stuck in the world of admin and process all the time. And the truth is that I have not solved that question yet. I just gave all of my team leads a brief and said, we have to do these things, but we have to do them better, smarter, faster, and easier, so it's less painful for people. And my only rule is you cannot add anything else to do. You can only take things away. Now go and tell me the best way to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very good. Excellent. Well, Freddie, do you have any questions? You normally do. I'll give you an opportunity. Here we go.
So thanks. Fantastic presentation. A lot of as you said, pains that are shared by others. As the resident accountant, I need to ask the questions around KPIs and bonuses associated with that. I've seen. Have you set in place any sort of incentives that move people towards synchronicity, or can you share a few ideas?
Interesting. I like this one. This is not one that anyone has asked me before, so I'm excited. So a big impetus for me making these moves to integrate the teams is growth, right? And that was my one metric, is like, I want to grow our contribution to the bottom line of this agency. And that takes the form of revenue, the all powerful dollar. And so using the information I had available to me, I would set annual revenue goals, and I had to like lean back and go, okay, how am I going to hit this revenue goal? a more integrated offering that elevates what we do is the only way. We cannot just keep checking boxes with SEO best practices for the rest of forever and grow our team, create more job opportunity, and grow our revenue and improve what we're giving to clients. So while that's not a very exciting or complex KPI, it was the big KPI, and it helped me to get laser focused. Other metrics that we look at and share out with the company proactively. No one really asked us for this, so we're just trying to market our successes. But we share out things like that stat about how many of our clients are working across different teams. How many of our clients were only working with one team at the beginning of the year, but we were able to upsell by the end of the year. I think the sheer volume of case studies we've been able to get out the door is also a big one. I would say we averaged like 4 or 5 case studies a year 5-6 years ago. Now we're averaging 35 or 40 case studies a year, many of which are across multiple disciplines. That marketing success, like success begets success, if that makes sense. So we get some great case studies that tell the story of this joint offering. We market them like crazy internally with clients and new biz pitches, and suddenly minds are open and we can do more work like that, win more business, create more case studies, and so on and so on.
Heather, that very sentence is going to be played on loop even more frequently than Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas to my team for the next month.
That is like sacrilegious on my team. I have a lot of very big Christmas fans.
But what you just said is so true about just creating that. Now, I do have one question, and it's more, I think from an agency perspective, it makes sense. And as you said, the almighty dollar speaks, and probably agency folks are a bit more obsessed about it because we live and die by the sword. But with client teams, often it's not so much about the KPIs and growing the revenue. Of course, you're going to hit the KPIs. It's just the sheer
a business is a business, right? Like an in-house business still has to make more money.
Absolutely. I don't disagree, but the majority of the time I found that the biggest blocker for in-house marketers was time and headspace. Like, I just don't, I've got a headcount for it, I just don't have enough. How much would you recommend your clients to also help you join that effort? Because obviously, as an agency, you work with your clients to create a success, but if you end up having blockers, whatever you're trying to push may not actually land correctly. Do you recommend as an agency to also update KPIs, speak within your management to update KPIs and potentially bonuses for that synchronicity?
I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Are you saying if KPI 1 doesn't work, do we adjust in order to get to synchronicity?
No. I'm more thinking about most brand marketers have KPIs and performance related to the performance of their channel. So a performance team manager is about, obviously, I need to bring X amount of revenue and to hit certain customer acquisition costs, so on and so forth, margin, return on investments. Now,
kind of like that example I shared earlier where the client gave one team one goal, another team another goal. Yeah.
How much do you recommend to the senior management teams in clients to update those KPIs, to update those potentially bonuses and things like that? Or is it
to be more unified? For example, I mean, I'm an outspoken person, but it served me well. I think it is worth the conversation. I mean, if you can present the risks and benefits of different approaches, the big risk of different goals for different teams is you're going to have every team going down a totally separate lane, totally separate direction. But any business cares about the dollar. The whole point is to grow revenue and profit, right? But when we have 10 different teams going in 10 different directions, you're not covering more ground necessarily. You're creating fragmentation, duplication of efforts. There's a real financial cost to gaps in communication or missed information or institutional knowledge that doesn't get shared. There's real tangible dollars that get lost. So if you can make a strong business case in the way that executives actually care about, like, hey, these are great goals, but how can we get the whole team moving towards something more central? Maybe these are sub goals and we need a bigger picture goal that all of us are aiming towards. But I think I would push harder than I did with that client. The client has come around very, very differently since then, and we definitely have a more unified approach. But that took like a year or two of hard conversations and like sort of doing what the client asked initially, or doing what your boss asks initially, and sort of being supportive and being a team player, but also simultaneously saying, hey, I'm doing this thing that you asked, and I'm seeing this other opportunity, or I'm seeing that this could be better.
Awesome. Well, you answered my second question. It's like, do you have a question early, or do you have that question to get a few runs of the board on the board, and then have that conversation around, hey, maybe adjusting a few bits and pieces might do good.
Yeah, totally depends on the client and their appetite. You know, some clients are like, oh yes, I'm paying you to tell me these things. This is great. Others are like, just give me what I ordered, you know?
Absolutely.
Those are great questions. I love those. Those made me think.
Thank you, Freddie. Well, I'm very aware that it's probably approaching 2:30 for you, Heather.
That's right.
So I think it's only fair that we let you get off to bed and get some sleep.
Bless you.
I'd just like to thank you from all of the attendees, and there'll be more people watching this when we send it out to the network of our mailing list for the community. So thank you for sharing all of those insights. It was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot in there, and I'm sure everyone else learned a lot. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you so very much for having me. This is a lot of fun. It's like a slumber party, kind of.
It is, kind of. Excellent. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.